Hello and welcome to the third AIB Journals webinar featuring the latest research from our two journals, the Journal of International Business Studies and the Journal of International Business Policy. My name is Klaus Meyer and I'm a professor at the AIB Business School in Canada. My co-host today is Esther Tipman, who is joining us from the National University of Ireland in Galway. Hello, Esther.
Hi, Klaus, and hello to everyone. This is a very exciting initiative that has attracted a lot of interest from around the world within the AIB community and beyond. So welcome everyone who has joined us today, and I'm looking forward to co-moderating this webinar. Back over to you, Klaus.
As our regular participants know, we are organizing this seminar as a new forum for sharing research and basically making best use of the available technologies. And I apologize, I have a technical problem. Esther, can you quickly take over for me?
So we're organizing these webinars to really cover cutting edge research and ideas. And today we have three exciting papers. They're all conceptual and they were recently published in the Journal of International Business Studies in JIBS. And what we're trying to do is to include and bring together senior people in the field, but also younger scholars who have perhaps published for the first time in JIBS. So today we would like this session to be very interactive. So please use the Q&A function in Zoom that you can see at the bottom of your screen to share your questions, which we will then draw on during the Q&A session. And also please use the like function and the emoji options to really give us your reactions during today's sessions. Klaus, are you back okay? Would you like to take over again to introduce this session and the speakers?
Yes, I'm ready to take over. I had just had an echo in the system, which is one of those things, and that happen in a live webinar, and that's why we have co-hosts so we can support each other. I'm going to do share screen again. This webinar here are all the people we want to thank. I should not jump over that slide. Of course, we thank the journal editors for running the journals and for giving us this opportunity. But I'd like to also thank my coordinator in making this webinar happen, that is Tim Devini. And we have two people who help us a lot on the technology side. It's Tunga Kiyak at the AIB office and Renfei Gao at Manchester. Now, this webinar is talking about research that has recently been published, and Esther already emphasized it's a conceptual papers we're talking about there. But we hope that this webinar also will feed into the special issue, which has a deadline of September 30, 2020. So we encourage everybody who is online today to think about their own research projects that they are currently conducting or that that's getting ready towards publication. One thing I'd like to say is that today's papers are conceptual papers and they're mainly about ideas, but the research we're looking for the special issue is very much also empirical research. Okay, so we have a lot of ideas around here, but we need to test some of those ideas and to make sure that the empirical research and theoretical research work together as we move forward. So much for that pitch. Now, just a very quick introduction. There are a few keywords that will pop up in the discussion today. One is markets, platforms, ecosystems. Okay, because we're now going to talk about a digital economy, and we have to rethink about these basic concepts. A market is a place where we use price of suppliers and customers agreeing on an exchange. A platform is the place where this exchange is taking place, including physical infrastructure traditionally, and also the legal regulatory infrastructure. And then, of course, this idea of ecosystem, which in a traditional way would be the buyers and sellers in the market, but also a lot of people hangers on, like on the one picture I have here on the slide, you see in the background somewhere is doing a little performance, which again attracts people to the marketplace who then end up trading. So there are more people involved in an ecosystem than the buyers and the sellers. So I'm introducing this just to say those three keywords will play a role as we listen to the three presenters. And with that, I'll go to the presenters. Satish, I'd like you to go first, talking about global platforms and ecosystems implications for international business studies. Over to you, Satish. Unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you, Klaus. I'm just going to wait until Renfei has put up my slides. Great. Thank you. So first things first, it's really great to be here. Good morning, everybody. And I know that some of you, it's good afternoon and good evening, I guess. But on behalf of my co-authors, Shaka Zahra and Yadong Lu, I want to thank Klaus, Tim, and Esther and Alain for inviting us to be part of this. This is a very exciting webinar series. So we are really thrilled to be featured here. I think as Klaus was mentioning, the digital economy is expanding very fast. In fact, I just 2 weeks back, I read a McKinsey article saying that in the 8-week period that we were having for this COVID-19, world over, both in terms of customers as well as businesses, digital adoption had increased to the extent of around 5 years. So we basically jumped around 5 years worth of adoption in this 8-week period. So I think digital economy is becoming very important and part of ecosystems, and that has significant impact on the way business is conducted internationally. So that's our focus of the paper. Now, also, I would like to point out that our effort here has been to provide a broad canvas picture of the implications. So I'm going to be focused more on the big picture ideas rather than drilling down. I know that the next 2 presentations would drill down a little deeper into some of these specific issues. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to start off saying that the platforms have become very important, not just in the consumer side, also in the business side. On the consumer side, we all know about all these big popular platforms, but in the last 5 to 6 years, it has become very, very, in the business side also, it's become very, high adoption has gone up very high. Just want to take one example, which is probably very distant from what we are generally used to in terms of technology adoption, which is digital agriculture, or it's also called precision agriculture, where these digital platforms have been built to connect farmers with equipment manufacturers and other parties or entities in the sector. And increasingly, these platforms become a very important vehicle for companies to venture outside their home country and to go into expand into other foreign markets. So a good example of that is Climate Field View, which is from Bayer. Climate Field View is actually part of Climate Corporation, which is a subsidiary of Monsanto, which was acquired by Bayer. So it has become a very powerful vehicle for Bayer to get into some of the markets that they traditionally have not been in present. Next slide, please. So that is really the starting point, that digital platforms have become very important, and associated with that is the ecosystems, which Klaus was mentioning earlier, that all the different parties and the interdependencies between them get featured in different ways, and that also has implications for us here. Next slide, please. So I want to start with this, thinking about some of the assumptions of extant IB theories and to what extent that has changed or impacted by these platforms. A few things that I will just tease out. One is there is a lot of focus on material objects in much of these theories compared to non-material or digital. There is a lot of focus on ownership of these assets or resources as the prime driver of internationalization. There's a focus on friction, and that friction is increasingly physical friction as well as friction across boundaries, organizational boundaries. And also the fact that there is a significant focus on transactions which are monetized increasingly rather than non-monetized transactions. Now, if you look at the studies in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, you'll see that some of these assumptions have been relaxed in many IB studies, but by and large, that still holds. So that is I think that's one departure point for us. Next slide, please. So it really asks the question, to what extent some of these assumptions have been changed? And if they are, then what does that mean for us in terms of building new theories or adapting our existing theories? Next slide, please. So if you look at digital platforms and ecosystems, some of the characteristics of that, one is we talked about the focus on material objects. Here you see that there is a lot of focus on non-material objects, and non-material objects, which are binary, digital, they have different characteristics. And so if you have different characteristics for these resources, then what do they tell us about how they are shared, how they are used, and what are the implications of that? Second part is we talked about focus on ownership. Here we'll say that there is a focus on sharing, and there is a focus on orchestration or controlling rather than actually owning those assets and resources. That is the second. We can also say that the type of friction, there is still friction in the sharing of resources, but the nature or the type of friction is different when you have non-material. So for example, you'll see that digital objects are increasingly agnostic to location or geography. And so that becomes another point of departure for us. While monetized transactions still are you also see there is a lot of transactions which are not monetized. There are interactions across organizational and national boundaries. And what are the implications of that? Another big part of it is the focus on ecosystem rather than just the firm. So if you think about performance, now firm level performance and ecosystem level performance become equally important. We'll also talk about the general fluidity that is infused by digital technologies, and that has implications on both agency as well as the outcomes of value creation. So next slide, please. So I think our contention here is that if you think digital platforms and ecosystems become a context for international business, then other opportunities to look at how they can extend some of these ideas and concepts from digitization platforms, how they can enrich or extend IB theories. And I think that we don't know for sure, but I think it's worth exploring. And that's the spirit with which we wrote our paper. Next slide, please. So, since that platforms and ecosystems is a very broad area, we tried to, bring them together in a way that would allow us to tease out the most important facts. So if you look at the literature on platforms and ecosystems, you can see that they have been looked at in two different disciplines. One is product development, where it has been viewed largely as a venue for innovation, for companies to come together, and the platform provides the venue for innovation. And the other part is in industrial economics, where platforms have been looked at as a multi-sided marketplace, which Klaus mentioned earlier. So these two are to some extent complementary. There are lots of platforms that are hybrid that provide both. And I think if you look at it, then you see that there are three themes that emerge. One is, as I mentioned earlier, shared resources. So instead of owned resources, there is a shift to a more focus on shared resources. And then you can look at how advantages firms are derived are based on. Is it based on the resources they own, or is it based on the resources they control or orchestrate? Second part is the connectivity. So digital technologies and platforms and ecosystems provide new forms of connectivity. which range from formal to informal. And so there's a whole range of possibilities. For example, companies can directly connect with their customers through digital platforms. And that actually implies new ways of building knowledge. These are very fluid in terms of how they can change over a period of time. The third is flexibility. So modularity and things like that allow us to be very flexible in mixing and matching these resources or digital assets, and thereby combining, recombining and creating new value for global customers. So these themes sort of together inform our understanding of what are the implications of digital platforms and ecosystems. Next slide, please. So what we did was we looked at around 8 different broad theoretical perspectives or theories areas of within IB, and try to see what are the different ways in which they get impacted. So obviously we don't have enough time to go through each and every of them today. So I'm going to just take a few of these, but you can see that on the rows are related to those 3 themes that we identified, and the different columns relate to the different theoretical perspectives or areas of inquiry within IB. Let me just take a few, and then we'll talk about what are the broader implications of that. So next slide, please. So this is the first one, which obviously is going to be dealt in more detail in the next 2 presentations. But I just wanted to highlight that the need to focus on advantages that are based on the ecosystem rather than the firm. So the locus of advantages lie within the ecosystem. Those are the ecosystem specific advantages. They can also be context specific advantages, which we say that increasingly is the business context might be more important than the country, or for example, you can see that in the sharing economy that if the value proposition is the same across a particular region, it's very easy to, they become very portable, and that is actually an advantage that can be used to enter new markets. So I think we think that these constructs, if we look at in more detail, can help us to understand internalization in platform-based foreign markets. And importantly, their interactions with firm-specific assets and country-specific assets can help us generate new knowledge or new insights on that. Next slide, please. So taking another part is the innovation done by multinational enterprises as asset recombination. So this is a theme that has been in the IB literature for quite some time. And there is a focus on modularity in that literature. But what is different is obviously digital assets are more portable. They are more malleable. They can be changed. They are agnostic to products and locations. But just to take 2 concepts, one is the concept of layered modular architecture, which says that it's not just the modularity of the asset that is important, it is also the layer in which it lies. So traditionally, the modularity literature has looked at one product design hierarchy. So everything is connected so that there is a domain is a product, which is the way it is used in, let's say, the automobile industry traditionally for 20 or 30 years. But digital assets are not that restrictive. So one can actually figure out or identify multiple design hierarchies by combining assets in different layers in different ways. So what that tells us is that there are different value paths that can be deciphered using the same or different sets of digital assets. Another concept is generativity, which relates to outcomes that are generated or created without any input from the original creator. So it allows us to think about how this recombination unfolds, and what are the dynamics of that, and what is the role of the multinational enterprise of the in that process, and how does it help in creating innovation in different markets. Next slide, please. I'll just take one more example. This is, think about bone globals and digital, the digitally infused business models, which allow them to, go from one country to another country rapidly. So there is a lot written about how these digitized business models are portable and how that becomes easier to deploy. It also thinks about micro MNEs or micro multinational enterprises that are dependent on some platform. And so there are two issues. One is the power equation between these micro MNEs and the platform owner or platform leader. And the other concept is related to the technology itself, how affordances related to digital technologies can be used by members in the ecosystem to adapt to different forces in the local foreign market. So broadly, these ideas tell us that one needs to think about what are the characteristics of these digital technologies and the platforms, and how can we look at the multinational enterprises expansion from that perspective. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to wrap up saying that there are different concepts that can be pulled in together from. One is from the digitization literature or digital technology literature, and the other from the platforms and ecosystems literature. And if we can do combine some of these ideas, we can come up with some constructs like ecosystem-based advantages, ecosystem-specific advantages. And then next slide, please. And then we can apply that and see how that applies in specific areas or theories related to IB, like international entrepreneurship, and see how we can enrich it. There are also possibilities to consider the impact of contingencies. For example, there is a lot of talk recent months about digital sovereignty in different parts of the world, and different countries are sort of creating or warning of their internet in different ways. And so there's a big question about how does these initiatives that are happening in different parts of the world limit the portability of the digital platforms, and what does that tell us about the opportunity for MNEs to use that? So I believe, and our primary thesis in this paper is a call for us to look deeper into some of these concepts and see how existing theories in IB can be reinterpreted or could be reinterpreted from those perspectives. So I think that's what I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Satish, for your insightful presentation. Your background is more in technology management, whereas the next two speakers are sort of more coming from the theory of the multinational enterprises. So I think the audience will pick up that there are differences in the approaches. I hand over next to Liang Chen, who is joining us from Melbourne today. Special thanks for getting up in the middle of the night for us. The paper you'll be presenting is Ecosystem-Specific Advantages in International Digital Commerce. Of course, you have another paper in JIBS recently, but for this presentation, you're focused on this one. Over to you, Liang.
Thanks, Klaus. Thanks, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Feels like dreaming. So my presentation actually connects very well with what Satish just discussed, but I'm going to zoom in on the concept of ecosystem-specific advantages. The paper is written with JT Li from HKUST, Jingtao and Jiye from Renmin University, as well as Jianwen Liao from JD.com. So Jianwen is actually the Chief Strategy Officer at JD.com, which is one of the biggest platforms in China. So would you like me to share the screen or?
Yes, please.
All right. So what we're trying to do here really is to draw attention to ecosystem as an organizational mode governing inter-firm relationships in today's digital economy. We all know there is a huge body of literature out there documenting the fit between inter-firm relationships and the governance mechanisms. So if we categorize the relationship depending on whether it involves relation-specific investment and whether the components that firms produce are part of an integrated system, or rather modular, we will have a 2x2 matrix. I focus on the upper right cell here, which is very common to ecosystems and platform ecosystems in particular. Our traditional theory would say that standard manufacturing interfaces, therefore being modular, should reduce the need for coordination and favor externalization, whilst relation-specific investments should increase the need for coordination and favor internalization. So, okay, hang on a second. It seems that this cell is beyond the realm of traditional theory, and this is our starting point. So what we mean by ecosystem governance is that you have an ecosystem leader orchestrating a huge network of autonomous actors possessing complementary assets and often, coming from diverse industries. The relationship between the focal firm and its partners is based on a modular structure, meaning that being a partner, you can connect your production system with the ecosystem without having to know the detailed workings of other interdependent components. To draw and gain value from the ecosystem, complementors are often required to customize their offerings to the specifications of the ecosystem. Sometimes technical specifications, sometimes institutional, sometimes market specific. The coordination, of course, can involve contract or relational governance, but often does not. Common research settings we have seen include ecosystems around video game consoles, mobile operating systems, e-commerce platforms, social network platforms, and so on and so forth. So our message here really is that we need a new perspective to help us understand inter-firm relationships in the digital economy. And then, some of you might say, hold on, we do have theories of network MNEs in IB. Yes, we do. Global Factory by Buckley, flagship firm by Rockman, and we just had a JIBS webinar last week on global value chains. Network theories concern how the hub MNE can extract a higher proportion of the rents being generated. The idea is that the focal MNE accesses network resources to be combined with their ownership advantages, and meanwhile reduce production costs through network coordination. MNEs also use contract or relational governance in those bilateral relationships to try to protect their ability to capture value. And very differently, the logic of ecosystem governance is that value creation requires multiple co-specialized partners, and coordinating these partners on the whole will lead to higher returns rather than lower costs. The ecosystem leader, which tends to be a platform firm, draws resources from unknown complementors beyond their direct control. In that sense, neither contract nor relational governance would work well. The role of the ecosystem leader is to align the interests of ecosystem participants and say, let's create value together and make the ecosystem bigger and more appealing. And to put it simply, the focal firm grants access to external actors and seeks to exploit their innovation capabilities and of course, economies of specialization. And partners, in turn, extend the ecosystem's value proposition, and they're often required to make specific investments which will boost the competitive advantage of the entire ecosystem. This is how inter-firm cooperation is achieved. The ecosystem perspective really is a theory of value creation rather than value capture, which traditionally has been the theme of IB theory. So one of the implications here is that we need to rethink ownership advantages In ecosystems, value proposition really hinges on the external complementary assets owned and controlled by a large uncoordinated audience. The ecosystem leader will only have very limited standalone advantages unless other complementary components are present. So what it means is that you simply cannot create value without complementors innovating or trading. And what's more telling is that research has shown that improving the platform's technological performance, which is essentially a key indicator of FSA, can actually increase development challenges for third-party complementors and actually discourage them from innovating, which means a sole focus on the platform firm's FSA might be misleading. Therefore, we should consider ecosystem-specific advantages, ESAs, consisting of 3 components. First of all, at a complementor level, resources. The higher the amount and the greater the diversity of complementary resources, the greater the ecosystem's value. And the second, at a system or structure level, complementarity, meaning that the more of one type of complementary product will increase the value of other types of complementary products for the user. Users are more likely to stay within an ecosystem showing greater complementarity than those containing homogeneous or unrelated activities. And the complementors too are more likely to want to bind with and invest in such ecosystems because their offerings are made more valuable by other actors and their activities. And third, since complementors are autonomous and pursuing their own goals, they may well act against the interests of the ecosystem. So you need explicit coordination to ensure that the behaviors of these autonomous participants can create positive externalities. So the third component at the platform firm level involves governance rules that platform firms employ to manage the interdependent relationships of ecosystem participants. Since our understanding of international expansion or international production is traditionally based on a theory of inter-firm relationships, and we believe ecosystems perspective will be helpful for IB research, and we encourage our community to explore research directions along those lines. And first of all, we suggest exploring the drivers and the mechanisms underlying the international diffusion of digital platforms from a user adoption perspective rather than a purely firm-led market commitment perspective. User interactions and preferences are defined by their immediate surroundings. Issues like local network effects and how to overcome local network effects might be worth looking to. And second, regarding complementors, we zoom in on the issue of bottlenecks, referring to the component in the ecosystem that has poor technical performance and would impair the efficiency of the entire ecosystem. Bottlenecks are a new source of location disadvantage. It could be logistic services, it could be content providers, so on and so forth. We need to understand how the ecosystem leader addresses the issue of bottleneck. It could basically occupy the bottleneck position. That's essentially internalization. It could also encourage or empower more complementors to enter the bottleneck position. We also draw attention to the dynamic balance between value creation and value capture. We believe value capture should still be part of our research. The dynamics might be a function of competitive intensity in a local market. Greater competition will lead platform owners to emphasize value creation over value capture because they still rely critically on retaining these complementors' support. And finally, regarding the focal firm, the platform owner or the platform firm, there is still this trade-off between integration and responsiveness, which we are familiar with. But this trade-off might be driven by the network structure, whether the user network is a globally integrated one, meaning that user interactions and the content produced and consumed on the network may transcend national boundaries, as in the case of Airbnb, or the network is broken into fragmented clusters at a local or country level, as in the case of Uber. That has implications for whether the platform can leverage international network effects. And of course, it's not just externalities or network effects that matter. We also talk about platform owners' learning orientations. Given that platform designs, the governance rules, and the ecosystem scope can all be changed after the platform is launched or after the platform has entered a host country. The platform firm can really utilize experimental learning to try to figure out the best approach to improving complementarities, and perhaps, experiment in one country and implement in others, as in the case of Facebook launching the short video platform called Lasso. There are studies of experimental learning and integrative capabilities that we can draw from strategy and related research that will help us understand how the ecosystem leaders' characteristics contribute to successful internationalization. In the paper, we'll also propose the framework of ESA creation, ESA transfer, ESA upgrading. I'd encourage you to have a look, and hopefully it's helpful for your own research. That's it from me. So hopefully it's helpful and can inspire future research along these lines. Back to you, Klaus.
Thank you very much, Liang. I see one theme arising from both of the presentations so far, and is that some of our analysis may have to take place on the level of the ecosystem as opposed to the level of the firm, which resonates with something that I think came out of the discussion we had 2 weeks ago when David Thies was talking about dynamic capabilities and globalization, where also the idea of ecosystem and dynamic capabilities may have to be analyzed at the level of ecosystem, is an interesting question. But of course, that raises questions regarding the interaction between the ecosystem, the member firm in the ecosystem, and the lead firm or the platform owner, as to use the term Liang used. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Elitsa. She will talk about the paper Internationalization Theory for the Digital Economy, and she's joining us today from Boston. Over to Elitsa.
Thank you, Klaus. So let me just share the screen as well. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Very honored to be here with such a stellar panel with great insights. I will try to keep it short. I'm sure there's a Zoom fatigue at this point, people jumping in from session to session. So, and I do look forward to the discussion. So briefly, this is a project with my friend and colleague, Charles Dhanaraj. What we try to do with our paper is to broaden internalization theory for the digital economy. And I want to walk you through our 3 key points, why are they important, and briefly the implications of that. So the first key point we're trying to make in our paper is that when you think about digitalization, what is happening around the world today, we see that it's fundamentally changing the nature of knowledge, right? And so our point is that because digitalization makes it possible to remove the information from the actual product or service before you even begin consuming the service, that is an important insight that should be incorporated into our theories. And so from that, digitalization also makes it key that you can separate the physical asset from the digital asset, and you no longer need to be owning physical assets to internationalize. You can do it through a digital platform, which is also something that we look at. So we build our research on Simon's near decomposability term, and we explore how does digitalization affect technology and human capital assets. And so what we observe is on the technology side, we argue that digitalization makes it technological FSAs much more easier to transfer overseas, but also harder to protect, right? So why it makes it much more easier to transfer overseas? Based on the two wonderful presentations we just heard, we very much are in line with Satish and Liang's thinking that modularity is important here. And the value of modularity is that it breaks the service, it breaks the service into smaller components, so you can upgrade smaller pieces of information as opposed to the entire system. So you can much more easily scale up operations. And just as a one example, Uber was able to internationalize a city a day using such modular technology and platform, as opposed to, for example, the Marriott Hotel, which took it over 100 years to build the international footprint it has today. We also argue that because of digitalization, technology becomes harder to predict. I mean, you see competitors, you know, Ola, I think we saw on the presentations, Ola Cab and Lyft and so forth, challenging Uber. So we argue in our paper that companies, in order to protect against that, companies are using walling-in effects. And walling-in effects are the idea that you use file level encryption. So only sender and receiver would be able to understand the message. So encrypt the technology as much as possible. Use complex technologies, use proprietary algorithms, big data, so that nobody else can replicate that. And case in point is Amazon, how it's been able to sustain its competitive advantage, and even challengers like Walmart, who are trying to build digital capabilities, have not been able to really catch up on this continual improvement of its walling-in capabilities. On the human capital side, we argue that digitalization makes it much more easier to bundle human capital, advanced human capital, with the host partner's platform. And so it makes it also, it reduces the coordination costs within the firm. So there's software nowadays you can install on the company's network, and you can train people virtually, right? You can monitor your employees' behavior on the network remotely without the need to actually meet face-to-face, right? And so when it comes to generic assets, though, we are arguing that eventually companies won't have to be transferring generic assets overseas, but they can be doing that using the generic assets of the host partners. So the third point, key point of our paper, is that digitalization creates a dual role for the network. On one hand, the network becomes an asset, an advantage. On the other, the network is a governance mode, very much in line with the two presentations we just heard. The network becomes an asset because of this idea of network effects, increasing returns in network effects, right? Metcalfe's law, the exponential growth of value being brought by different users coming on the network. And perhaps this is one of the key ideas why different companies have not been able to match Amazon's digital capabilities as much as, you know, Facebook and so forth, the installed user base that they have. So the size and quality of the network becomes key for digital firms. But it also becomes a governance mode because it enables you, if you have, depending on the type of FSA the company is focusing on, the companies can leverage those assets either as more central to a digital network, which can be more centralized, like example is the iOS, the Apple, only the platform owner governs the system, or through a digital network, but which is less centralized. And one case in point is Cloud Foundry, where you have a bunch of industry leaders who come together and they have a joint governance of their ecosystem, encrypting of the technology and so forth for a proper intellectual property protection. And then we also argue that hierarchy will remain the dominant form of governance of advanced human capital. Case in point, McKinsey, right? McKinsey is, even though McKinsey uses digital technologies to reach foreign markets, but it's still its know-how is its people, its consultants. So it makes sense for McKinsey to keep them close internally within the firm, fully centralized. And like you see, in terms of generic skills, Uber is not going to be transferring its drivers from the US overseas. They will be using the drivers in the host markets. Why is this important? So this is reality. I mean, everything we've been hearing so far in the presentation tells us platforms are here and they're here to stay. And so customers also expect products and services to have a digital experience, and companies are rushing nowadays to offer digital experience as much as possible. It's also important because digitalization is all about maximizing value, as the previous presenters mentioned. It's no longer just about profit maximization of an individual firm, but value for the entire network, which is a very different concept from the traditional, pi max functions that we've been solving from our microecon courses. And another reason why it's important is that digitalization essentially inverts the firm inside out, right? So it makes it possible that the companies, creates the idea of open innovation. The company gets ideas from outside of the firm through uncoordinated users, which are much, much more in numbers and size than the number of employees within the firm. So essentially, an interesting insight here we're trying to address is why are there companies like digital platform firms, which have far fewer number of employees, but yet they dominate their non-platform incumbents in terms of market capitalization. So just on a simple example, Uber's employees, 16,000, market cap about 70 billion US. Compare that to BMW's employees, 130,000 with a market cap of about 38 billion. So why is it that those smaller companies, like the previous presenters were saying, it seems that employment within the firm is no longer key to be able to sustain this market capitalization. And so the implications are that we need to be thinking about how do you think of the definition of the multinational, right? Ownership of physical assets is no longer required. So are we moving in the direction of perhaps something like an enterprise that controls activities in foreign markets where control can be digital, right? We mentioned earlier that it's all about value creation nowadays, and value capture is part of the picture as well. So if you're part of a platform, how do you capture the value you're contributing to, right? Another big item picture that we see is because platforms are here to stay, if you're a company, do you build your own platform or do you join somebody else's platform? And one example we want to share is Daimler and BMW recently co-invested 1 billion euros to create a joint platform, mobility platform to serve their customers. So what are the drivers of this build or join decision of digital platforms? And so we simply wanted to leave you with this thought that our idea of ease of transferability versus appropriability hazard, we think serves as a decent step to start testing, operationalizing these concepts. I know our papers are all theoretical, but we very much support this in our paper. We discuss the need to measure some of these theoretical concepts. And eventually, our key point is, as you see here, Robert Frost mending wall line, something there is that doesn't love a wall, right? Our key point is that digitalization fundamentally changes the nature of knowledge. Thank you.
So thank you to all the presenters, Satish, Liang, and Eli, and also their co-authors who have probably joined us virtually for today's session. So there are many interesting points for future research in terms of the specific phenomena related to the digital economy, platforms, and digital ecosystems that are of interest. But also you gave us some excellent ideas in relation to which IB theories, concepts may need extension, perhaps even revision. So there's a lot of food for thought for all of us. Now I've picked up a couple of issues and comments that were raised by the audience. And one question that did come through was around, I suppose, the significant differences that exists between digital firms, between digital platforms. So someone mentioned, for example, some platforms, they may only or primarily sell material goods. If you think about Amazon and eBay, vis-a-vis perhaps other platforms that tend to be primarily digital, such as app stores. So I suppose the question that I would like to explore with you a little bit more is around the variation between digital firms. And also in one of the commentaries that's also published in JIBS that I would have worked in with Sinead Monaghan and Nicole Coviello, we also look at that issue a little bit more in relation to perhaps firms that were born digital, so have a purely digital product, primarily digital business model. Perhaps also we have a lot of firms that are going digital, established multinationals that are undergoing major digital transformation. So I suppose picking up on those issues, I would like to ask you, or the three of you, I suppose the variation amongst digital firms or the degree of digitality, does it matter in terms of the kinds of questions that we should ask, the kind of theories that we should seek to revise and develop? And if so, yeah, where do you see the most promising avenues for future research? I might hand over first to Satish, please.
So that's a very interesting question. I think, as you mentioned, there are digital natives, which are companies that have both their outcomes as well as their processes as digital, but then also have companies like, let's say, John Deere, which is a traditionally equipment manufacturer. But if you look at John Deere of today, compared to, let's say, just 10 years or even 7 years back, you would see that the digital component in their physical devices have gone up significantly. So the way customers interact with the physical product has changed. So I would say that while digital natives are different, the infusion of digital components into physical products and products are increasing significantly over every year. And so you would see that that is one thought that I have. If you have a fully digital platform or fully digital product and business model, I think many of these concepts would be at the extreme in terms of the portability, in terms of the generativity and everything else. But I think it is very difficult to say what part of it is, how does it change when there's a new line of research coming in technology area related to digital objects and material objects and how their interactions change the business model. So I think there are some very, very interesting ideas that could inform international business too.
Thank you, Satish. If I may pass on the same question to Liang.
Sure, thank you. I think yes, it does matter to some extent. Intuitively, you would think for platforms or digital firms where their products or complementary products are purely digital or digitized, they would find it easier to internationalize as compared to those where their products and services need to be combined with some sort of physical components, right? In that sense, in the latter case, the internationalization would also depend on whether the physical components can be easily, transferred abroad. I think from the future research point of view, one promising direction would be to try to perhaps break some common myths in the sense that, people might think for those purely digitized firms, they can easily go abroad. I think, in general, on average, it is the case, but we can look into the circumstances under which these purely digitized firms or purely digitized platforms might be constrained by distance, and that's, I think, somehow counterintuitive and might be more interesting, and also you would think those purely digitized firms might not need foreign direct investment to expand to foreign markets, right? Because they can sell their products and services through virtual channels. And then again, we might look into the circumstances under which these firms actually make foreign direct investment and why they make foreign direct investment, and whether the patterns, their location choices, the scope of their foreign direct investment are somehow similar or different from traditional firms, or their less digitized counterparts. And then finally, I think it might be worthwhile constructing some sort of index of the digitalization of firms, along a number of dimensions. For example, marketing and their marketing practices, the marketing channels they use, in terms of their operations, in terms of the digitalization of the products and services they sell, in terms of their strategy, how digital they are really, and then we can link that index with all sorts of outcomes, including internationalization outcomes and their behaviors and performance.
Thanks, Liang. Ellie, would you like to perhaps give your view on that?
Yes, thank you. So 2 thoughts on this. The first one is digitalization. I think when you think about digital platforms and how they compete globally, there's an element of not only firm level competition, but also country level competition. So when you think about, for example, Uber entering China, right? Uber was very unsuccessful there. In fact, there's, as far as I have read on this topic, there's hardly been ever any company from the West that has been successful, a digital company and from the West that has been successful in China. And so there's various reasons, there's political reasons, there's economic, socio-cultural reasons and so forth. So I think it's interesting, like Liang was saying, from a future research direction, to also examine competition. When we think about competition between digital platforms, the fully digital companies like Uber versus Didi or Ola and so forth, to think about the home country versus host country, broader political, socio-political or political economy picture. Because usually when companies compete, we don't think the non-platform, non-digital platform companies, we don't typically relate them to, oh, this is US competing versus China, right? But it seems that nowadays it's more and more prevalent, this idea that, oh, where is the company coming from? Would that be a competition, country level competition for my country, and how can I amend that? So that's one. The second thing is, I think from a future research point of view, it's interesting to also examine the contestability of markets that these fully digital companies create. As Satish was saying earlier, the more fully digital companies become, the more extreme things become, right? As opposed to when you have a physical component. So fully digital companies do create contestable markets in the sense that they reduce their cost of entry are sometimes even lower than the incumbent's cost, right? And they're able to compete extremely successfully. Like I gave you the example with Uber versus BMW's market cap. They're able to compete very, very successfully, very quickly against incumbents. So how do we move that direction? How do we account for this competition?
Okay, I'm going to take over now. Just on Uber, just one thought is, are Uber drivers employees or independent firms? I'm not going to ask you to answer that question now, but that is a big question, especially if you try to compare the numbers of employees. But I'm going to ask each of you a different question now that arises from what we have in the Q&A. So the question to Satish is, do you consider DPE's, digital platform enterprise, to be endogenous or exogenous during the process of internationalization?
So I think it depends on what the role of the firm is in that. So if you think about it as a complementary perspective, it is obviously exogenous because they have limited influence and they are primarily leveraging the advantages that provided by the platform, and that can be taken away, which we have seen in the case of Apple, for example. Apple actually keeps a list of the top 10 apps on their platform, and every year they see whether they can enter one of those markets. And so if Apple decides to enter that market, the unfortunate part is that the complementer who had written the original app is out. And so you see clearly that there is a exogenous impact on that. But from the perspective of the platform owner, some of this is endogenous because they do have the capability to orchestrate, and it is dependent on what is the orchestration capability and what effect it has on the platform. So I think it depends to some extent on the role played by the
that of course raises a lot of interesting questions. Also, if the platform owner is kicking out certain people in the ecosystem, that raises interesting issues for competition policy, especially if a dominant platform, right? Interesting questions here. For Elitsa, I'm going to do a screen share now. This is a question that I'm sure you're prepared for. In JIBS, right after your paper, we had another paper by Jean-François Hénard, which was basically arguing that Dhanaraj and Banalieva have no idea what is internalization theory. Well, that's sort of my summary. They are a little bit more polite, as academics usually are, okay? But basically the argument runs that the business models of the digital firms can be classified as brokers, retailers, possibly as franchisers. And what is the coordination that's happening is some sort of combination of price and hierarchy, which is pretty much what we see in traditional businesses, right? Williamson's Markets and Hierarchy books, which really should be called Price and Hierarchies. And therefore, networks can be explained by transaction cost theory or internalization theory. What's your response to Jean-François' critique of your work?
Sure, so thank you. We have tremendous respect and appreciation for his scholarship. So as you know, he's been quite key, 5 decades of contributions to IB, and with his idea back in the days when everybody was focusing on external transaction costs, his idea being that there are coordination costs that need to be taken into perspective as well. But when you also consider his idea, they haven't really gained the voice that they probably deserve over time. And probably the IB scholarship community was very shocked when Colgate and Zander's piece took off, hit a home run, pretty much predicated on the idea that yes, knowledge is difficult to copy because it's embedded in organizations, but it's also much more easier to transfer. We understand where his confusion is coming from. We appreciate his nostalgia for the good old days where technology wasn't as important. I personally understand, I do have a grandpa who I have a discussions like that as well. Oh, why is technology important? How come, we are talking about Uber and Facebook, what is that, right? But so his main critique against our paper is probably about 1.5 pages, 2 pages of his paper. He goes on to a lot of different tangents, which we don't really touch in our paper, the OLI paradigm, the FDI, and so forth. So I want to focus on those 2 pages that he really critiques us on. His key point is that we overestimate digitalization, and our response to that is that there's a danger to underestimate its importance. And so when we look at his arguments, he's saying, well, technology and human capital FSAs are not really important. And so, I'm thinking here, I really want to be a fly on the wall in a room where Professor Hénard talks to Jeff Bezos and tells Jeff Bezos, oh, technology and human capital really don't matter for your company, right? I really want to see how that conversation will go. So, or for that matter, Google or Facebook or so forth, right? So as we've been hearing from this webinar, platforms are here to stay, and that's the reality we live in. So we cannot close our eyes to what is going on. In terms of his arguing that networks are not an efficient governance mode, again, our response to that is that if they were not efficient, why would companies be investing billions of dollars? I gave you a couple of examples. There's probably a whole lot more you can find in a matter of seconds how companies are building platforms. So we do agree that is ultimately an empirical question, and we do agree that we have a theoretical piece, but we advocate fully in agreement that has to be empirically tested as well. So ultimately, the 3 key points, like I said, we want to leave him with is that networks are absolutely an ownership advantage. Network effects are not the same as the supply economies of scales that he's talking about. Just because you're reducing the marginal cost of production doesn't mean that you're going to benefit from network effects. If you don't have a large enough digital following, just because my t-shirt went down in price doesn't mean that me wearing the t-shirt is going to improve the value of other people wearing that t-shirt, right? So you have to, economies of scale are mostly about minimizing cost, whereas our story is about maximizing value, right? And so we believe that our framework of ease of transferability and appropriability hazard is a decent stepping stone to begin testing reality. But absolutely, our response is we have a responsibility as IB scholars to understand the world around us and to try to theorize it in a way that makes sense and move us forward, because digitalization does change the nature of knowledge.
Okay, thank you. That was an extensive answer, though I wish, I'm going to ask Jean-François at some stage to respond to that. And since we do have a recording of this, which will eventually be available on the AIB website, we will have the opportunity to get his views the next time we have a discussion. I'll make sure he's present. Liang, I'd like to ask you a question that is, are there significant theoretical differences between platforms that partially or fully deal with material goods, say Amazon or eBay, and those that deal only in digital products? And think about that question, especially when it comes to the strategies of internationalization. Okay, do you have any thoughts on that question?
I don't think I have a definitive answer, but just like I said, I think the major difference is, you know, for the purely digitized platforms, or for platforms dealing with digitized, you know, either user interactions or digitized content produced and consumed by users, it's probably easier for them to expand to foreign countries. Whereas, you know, if you compare that with, you know, platforms dealing with material goods and, you know, traditional types of goods and products, and they might face a higher, you know, entry barrier in terms of foreign entry. You know, that would depend on their success of internationalization might be dependent on, you know, the barriers having to do with traditional products and services. You know, sometimes might have to do with you know, trade tariffs, non-tariff trade barriers, and so on and so forth. And I think that's probably the main difference. And the other thing is our thinking. You know, it's probably easier to find purely digitized platforms, or platforms dealing with, you know, digitized content, to have more globally integrated network, in the sense that, you know, the content produced and consumed on these platforms can easily, you know, transcend national borders, and there's not too much of sort of national boundary or national barrier in that sense. And if you are dealing with, you know, traditional goods and services, you know, the national boundary might be a bigger issue. And also, just taking, you know, the example of Amazon in Australia, it really has been an issue with them in terms of, you know, shipping goods and you know, traditional goods and products from the States and from other countries where the products are manufactured. And, you know, the geographic distance must still play a very important role. And also, you know, it's more likely for that kind of platforms to encounter the issue of bottlenecks. Right? So one of the major bottlenecks regarding Amazon Australia is courier services. Right? The courier services really do not perform. And that takes a toll on the performance of Amazon Australia on the whole. So I think these are the sort of general observations I have, but I don't think I have a definitive answer at this stage, and that's open for future research.
Okay, thank you. There are a lot of things coming up. And so I look forward to lots of interesting papers for this special issue, because that's the opportunity for you to offer definitive answers to any of the questions that have been raised so far. Esther, what is your overall impression of today's discussion?
Yeah, Klaus, I would like to resonate that theme, and it's a very vibrant and important area of research, and there are just so many open questions. And also, I think the audience or the attendees also felt the same. Yes, we have a lot of conceptual work, but some raising the questions, are we jumping too fast to conclusions? So I don't want to jump to my own conclusions on that. I think it certainly resonates to the point that we need more systematic empirical examination to really push IB theory forward. So with that, I hope that all attendees of today's webinar got inspiration as to what to do next for their own research. So before concluding the webinar, I would like to draw everyone's attention to the next upcoming webinar. Renfei, if you wouldn't mind, please sharing the slide. So it's coming, yeah. Super, thank you so much. So our next webinar will be in 2 weeks' time, and it's specifically public policy focused and really trying to explore how IB scholars can contribute more to public policy debates. So as I said, it will be in 2 weeks' time. It will be promoted through our usual channels in terms of the sign up. So please stay tuned, and when it's being launched, make sure to sign up, that we see you again. So with that, I would like to thank everyone, the organizers, the panelists, and the audience for today's session. Thank you, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.